Hi, thanks for watching. I'm Eric Mieni, and this is Breaking New Ground, a show where we look at housing and how it affects you. Living in the city is convenient because of its closeness to places of work and modes of transport such as buses, taxis, and trains if you need to go anywhere. It is essentially central. And if you work in the city, it is definitely the best place to live. You can save money on transport by simply walking to work, for example. And you have easier access to city facilities like libraries, parks, etc. Unfortunately, the cities of South Africa are pretty full, and the land there is very expensive, which is why most city dwellers live in high-rise buildings and townhouses. To provide housing for the poor who wanted to live in the inner city was once an almost impossible proposition. That is, until now.
As the administrative seat of government, Tshwane is one of the major urban centers in South Africa. It is a space experimenting with innovative housing solutions for its growing population.
Social housing started in Europe, Norway, England, Germany, places like that, to provide housing for poor people and people on low income who needed decent accommodation. And it translates quite nicely to South Africa, where there are a lot of people who aspire to move out of poor living conditions into better, good quality housing, but at affordable rents.
athi indawo angangizamela kuyo angafonela eMashelton uye wangithatha ke wangiletha eShelton ePorter's House.
An organisation like YEAST, which is a faith-based organisation, can provide immediate shelter for people. Most social housing institutions cannot do that, but YEAST is fortunate that they've got various types of accommodation to provide housing for different people at times of need, for example, when they arrive in a city with nowhere to go.
Ensuring decent, affordable and well-managed social housing are BNG priorities. Yeast City is a prime example of this.
This is Yeast City. Sithe masifika lapha sathola uvelna uyena ke oye wasacela indawo kuyena wathi yayi khona indawo yokuhlala. Baye basithatha ke basibonisa ukuthi kuphi lapha esizofika sihlale khona.
Transitional housing is a subsidy type that was brought in particularly in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, whereby people on a low income could be given immediate short-term accommodation up to 6 months, particularly in the inner city, whereby they could be given care and support so they could then hopefully find permanent housing elsewhere.
Lena ke iPorter's House, la ngathi ngifika khona la isibangiza khona indawo. Ngangithukile because ishelter bengingayazi. So but noma bengitshela ukuthi ngizohlala khona ngingabhadali azange ngize ngikhole. So ngafika ke ngathola umuntu ebengishare naye intombazana usiwe. Sahlala ke naye nibangitshela ukuthi angizobhadala ngizohlala until ngithola umsebenzi. So siye sahlala ke.
Housing institutions overseas usually have programs in place to help empower their residents, because just providing a place for people to live isn't sufficient if people don't have work and other things to do. So when in South Africa, particularly small housing associations have been able to develop community development programs or economic empowerment initiatives.
La iselisedi lapha city housing ngithole khona umsebenzi bangitrainer bangifundisa umsebenzi lo wala laundry ngisebenzile ke khona until baze bengenza ngaba manager khona. So into engijabulela ukuthi nemali yami seyizokhona ukuthi ibe ningi ngikhona ukuthi ngivele kwe-flatini elikhulu kuleli ebengihlala kulona. So khona manje ngoba sebengenze ngaba manager sengikhona ukuthi sengenza zonke izinto zamabhuku ngenza ama-statistics ngikhaunte ama-loads abantu azilingelanga ukuthi mangaki.
Once people have got into a social housing institution, there are sometimes other opportunities that the housing institution can provide. For example, if there's a communal space, there can be a homework club in one housing institution, the children got together and performed a play with some help from an overseas funder. Some housing institutions have a creche on the premises. For example, there are a couple in the inner city of Joburg, and East City Housing managed to put one of its tenants in touch with the creche. But if there isn't one available, then housing institutions can put women and their children in touch with facilities that are available in the community.
Labana abantwana bami khona manje bangena la isikolo mara kulesikhathi sisahlala eCity baye babapha i-education yase crèche enkululeko daycare center so bathe uma bephuma khona base bezongena la primary. Kimina ngajabula kakhulu ngokuthi abantwana bami ene bazothola nemfundo engcono.
Caring for the individual and the family are core values in these programs. Activities that involve interaction of children, parents, and communities are encouraged and promoted.
When people move from a transitional space, if they're lucky enough to find a space, East City Housing, for example, their priority for any letting of their rental accommodation is to people moving on from their communal or transitional facilities. That isn't the case with all housing institutions. But once they have found a job and they can pay a rent, people can either rent from a housing association if there's the accommodation available, or they can be put in touch with the private sector in the cities where they live.
The streets of Tshwane, once daunting and unfriendly, have become home for Pretty. Being a part of this community has increased her confidence about raising a family in the inner city. For now, living in Hofmeyer House is comfortable, but she strives to better her life.
Ngijabulisa ukuthi ngithole indawo yami from yona east ngazothola indawo la eHofmeyer ngihlala khona.
Social housing institutions have been going for about 10 years in South Africa, but a key issue for the future is strong and good management. Tenants have to be able to live in a social housing environment as a community, and also there has to be good management by the landlord, which is caring, but also it has to meet the needs of the organisation, so tenants have to be able to pay their rent so the organisation can continue.
Khona manje sesinendawo yethu sizokhona ukwenza into endlini efana endlini engeyethu. So okulandelayo kumina ukuthi ngimuvele eflatini enkulu. And impilo yami ngibona kushuthi kule ndlela ebikuyona ikwazi ukuthi ihlangane. Ngizibona nami ngiwumuntu phakathi kwabanye abantu because ngibonga i-City Housing ngendlela engisize ngakhona because mangibheka yonke into ngibona benze yonke into ukuthi ngize ngibe lokho engikhona.
Welcome back, and thanks very much for watching Breaking New Ground. Now that we've seen how a social housing project can fulfill all your housing needs with the added benefit of placing you near the city center, we've come here to the East City Housing Project to discuss in more detail how a social housing project is made possible, how it adds value to your life as opposed to, say, an RDP house or other alternatives that BNG provides. With me today to discuss social housing are Joseph Lishabane, who heads up social housing in the National Department of Housing. Welcome. We have Pretty Mtambo, who you just saw in the insert. Welcome to the show. We have Stefan de Beer, who is the head of the Tshwane Housing Foundation. Welcome. And he also heads up the East Housing Project. We also have Nina Sadiki, who is also with the Tshwane Leadership Forum. Welcome to the show. To kick off the discussion, let me get the technical aspect of social housing out of the way with you, Joseph. First off, what is social housing?
Well, thanks, Eric. Social housing, it is an option, a choice of housing that generally is for rental, It's aimed at accommodating people who earn lower salaries, and these types of rental housing are managed by what we call social housing institutions. These are institutions or organizations that are not necessarily seeking to make profit, but rather to provide a social service in the form of managing these rental housing accommodation.
So, Nina, the Tshwane Leadership Foundation, would it be one of these institutions that Joseph is talking about?
Yes, the Tshwane Leadership Foundation is one of the institutions, because we also accommodate people who earn a certain amount of salary, which will make it easier for them to have to rent in one of our buildings. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is like you earn maybe as little as 3.5, and then you'll be able to be accommodated.
In order to rent the space?
Yes.
And how do they apply?
Look, the institutions would do a form of screening in terms of people who want to rent the buildings that they have. But as long as somebody has an income and they can prove that they have an income, then they qualify, and therefore they can apply to the institutions. They can apply to the municipality, who will direct them to the institutions as well.
Now, it seems to me, Stefan, like government relies quite a bit on what your foundation does. You manage the buildings, you screen people who come through. How much help do you get? How much cooperation do you get from government?
I think government creates a policy environment which is helpful, and then also in terms of subsidies. Provincial government deals with the subsidies, so once we screen people, we submit those applications to the Gauteng province. And we're trying to foster better relationships also at the local level, so that one can jointly look at available land and even joint developments of land for social housing.
Joseph, do you rely on the institutions to find buildings and land to convert to social housing projects, or do you actively look for them and then give them to institutions to convert?
Yeah, it's both ways. On the one hand, some institutions would take the initiative to grow the stock that they have, and therefore they'll go out looking for land, for buildings and so forth, and acquire those. But because it is now government's priority to increase the development of affordable rental stock through provincial government and municipalities, we would then be able to go out, identify the land, make sure that it's serviced, or in some instances, buy out these so-called bad buildings so that we can convert them, make them habitable, and then the institutions, the social housing institutions, would run those buildings.
You know, social housing is very new in South Africa, and it's something that we have to figure out, all of us. I think it's also a matter of access. Capital is often a problem with social housing institutions. There are very few of us that started off with a huge capital injection. You know, in our case, we started off with taking one building at a time, making it to work. And so we're actually competing against private sector. And so there are some challenges, I think, that we have to figure out to be able to access more land and property to make social housing to work.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll answer a few more questions like, can you rent to buy in a social housing project? How long is the waiting list? And of course, we'll speak to Preeti Mtamba about how all this has impacted on her life. Please stay with us. Welcome back, and thanks for watching. Joseph, can you rent to buy a flat or space in a social housing project?
The different projects would be designed to provide different options. So the organization, the social housing institution that is involved, depending on the mix of finances it has, it could have a loan that it needs to service for over a time. It could have a capital subsidy from government. So it will then design a project to provide for these options, to rent only, rent to buy, and it will make those choices available to people who will then have to decide which choice they want to exercise.
So if I qualify for a social housing project, I then have to decide if I want to rent or rent to buy, and then I look for the institution that provides what I want.
Certainly.
If you like.
Certainly. Eric, if I may just elaborate on the acceleration of the delivery of social housing stock. Certainly it has become a huge government priority to increase the delivery and development of social housing and specifically affordable rental stock. People move to cities and therefore they need relatively short-term accommodation, not necessarily to own. So what government has been doing is to put in place a policy framework that supports that, and that is in place. We're also putting a new law to support and regulate what happens in this sector. We've asked the private sector to respond to certain aspects, the expertise that they put in, the funding that they put in, but also the social housing institutions themselves to be better organized in terms of wanting to develop the stock. We've had opportunity to learn, we've had opportunity to correct the various mistakes, and we are ready to really upscale the delivery of affordable rental stock.
Pretty. Everybody here is talking about something that actually ended up being a part of your life, if you like. How has that been? Is everything that they're saying, in your opinion, great, and has it impacted well in your life?
Yeah, Tshwane Leadership Foundation has helped me a lot because I was staying at the shelter. Then from there, I started working, but my salary was very small. Then I spoke to them, to the City Housing, that if I can get one of their flats because they are reasonable.
How long did it take you before you got a unit?
It didn't took long. I think it took 3 months.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, Stefan, is that the average waiting time for a social housing project unit? I know people in RDP housing, for instance, wait 12, 15 years at a time.
I think Pretty was lucky. It was 3 months. I think our waiting list is longer than what we can, the number of units that we can produce at the moment. I know that in Tshwane there's about 30,000 families that are on the waiting list that can also qualify for social housing. So we really need to accelerate. At the same time, we also try to help people access other forms of housing whilst they wait. If I can just pick up on something that Pretty mentioned, I think for me social housing and what is beautiful about it is also that it's more than just creating shelter. It's about creating a sense of community, neighborhood, and it does provide people with access. The housing unit and the security of that provides them with other accesses to economic opportunity, to childcare.
Joseph, what are the instruments necessary to make all of this possible? Not just obviously the building itself, the people and the facilities. What are the instruments that government needs or utilizes to make social housing possible?
Partly governments provide the policy and the laws, the subsidy, which is a big part of it. But also you find municipalities then providing land, discounted service charges to the institutions. What you also find is that the private sector provides a lot of expertise and financing for these projects. At the end of the day, the important ingredient is the people who move in to live in these houses. Their attitude, their positive outlook, their spirit of community becomes very important because these people, they maintain these structures.
Nina, a lot of people who live in the city or have businesses in the city have this attitude that if you bring people who earn certain low salaries, you are looking at actually degrading the environment or the area you bring them into.
There's a liaison officer actually in every building, so who liaises with the office. If a person does something wrong, you go to that person, talk with them. If they don't understand, you go to the office, liaise with the office, and then the office will deal with the person. Yeah.
What's it like? How long have you been in is it Hoffman?
Hoffman, yeah.
How long have you been there now?
It's 5th year.
5th year. And what is it like? I mean, are the people breaking windows? Are they making too much noise? Are they stealing from neighboring buildings?
Yeah, As a noise, sometimes there are some people that sometimes they open their radio loud. But we used to have meetings, and we used to invite our landlords to come and to be with us, and they really come and we have meetings and we resolve the problems. Yeah.
Tell me a bit more about the Yeast City project itself. I mean, was it not the first ones you guys did?
Well, it was created out of the Tshwane Leadership Foundation. Yeast is quite intentional about creating a housing ladder. So we also have transitional housing, we have communal housing where people have single, double rooms with shared facilities. We have family units, mainly in the buildings that we've converted, but also some greenfield projects. And then we also have quite a bit of a special needs focus. Quite a number of the homeless people are people with special housing needs. Housing is not the only need, they might have other issues. And so we, for example, have a hospice for people with terminal illness. We're busy looking at a project with homeless people who have chronic mental illness, because often they fall through the cracks. And yet we think that in terms of building healthy communities, we also need to be able to provide access to those people with special housing needs.
Joseph, that sounds to me like an incredibly holistic approach to a social housing project.
Yeah, Eric, I think we really commend Yeast's initiatives. We believe that it's worthy of replication, and we want to support these initiatives with other faith-based organizations, even those initiatives that arise from the employers, be they different companies establishing this form of housing for their employees. We would want to support that.
Pretty, so you've been at Hofmeyer for 5 years. What does the future hold? And how has Hofmeyer helped in that?
Since I stay in Hofmeyer, I've managed to save some money for the future, because I cannot stay there for my whole life there. I'm moving forward. I'm looking for a family flat.
So the future is looking bright. Why aren't you wearing sunglasses? No, thank you so much for coming to the show. Joseph, thank you. Stefan, thank you very much. Nina, thanks for contributing. And to you for watching, thank you very much. I hope you learned a little bit more about social housing and how it can help improve your life. Please join us again next week when we look at the people's housing process, an option where people put together their subsidies in order to build each other bigger and better houses. See you then.